A lot of salads rely on the dressing for most of the flavour, and to stop them from being too dry. It's also often where most of the calories are. This salad I'm going to show you is completely vegan and doesn't need a dressing. The veg provide enough flavour and moisture on their own. It makes enough for 4 to 6 people, depending on how big your portions are. I use 2 large beetroots. When washing them, I try to get in the grooves, as there's often some hidden dirt that won't come out easily. The beetroots were quite large, so needed quartering. They need to be big enough to be gratable by hand, although it's worth mentioning at this point, I could have done a lot of the prep in a food processor, and that would definitely have been quicker, as there's enough ingredients I'd use it for that it would be worth getting out and setting it up. I don't want to leave them whole, as they'd take way longer to cook, and I'm not peeling them now because the skins rub off very easily when they're cooked. I chopped mine on an old chopping board. I'm not too worried about staining, but if you wash it up straight away, you should be okay. I covered them with cold water and then placed them on the hob to bring up to a boil. The reason I'm not just heating the water in the kettle, like you would if cooking dry pasta, is because root vegetables are so dense that when the outside is nicely cooked, the inside will be underdone. 200 grams of quinoa went into a pan with 400 grams of water. I seasoned it with salt and brought it up to a boil, and then turned it down to a simmer for 10 minutes. Whilst the beetroot and quinoa are going on the hob, I have time to get the chickpeas in the oven. I drained and washed one 400 gram can of chickpeas and put them on a baking tray to then flavour with olive oil, a couple of teaspoons of curry powder, cumin, smoked paprika, and salt and pepper. I always like to use my hands, but if you didn't want to get your hands dirty, you could always mix them together in a bowl before putting them onto the tray. Then into the oven they go at 180 degrees C or 356 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 15 minutes. Next, I diced 100 grams of dates into small cubes. I tend to half them and then slice them across several at a time. Dates can be a pain to chop as they are quite sticky, so if you find it easier, you could blitz them in a food processor. I popped the dates in a small tub and zested and juiced an orange over the top. To get more juice out of the orange, I rolled it first to loosen it up, which makes it easier to squeeze. Then I mixed it through and left it to marinate for at least 30 minutes. This all took about 10 minutes, so the quinoa should be in need of some attention. I'm looking for the water to be evaporated. It's easier for me to see what level the water is at if I give it a stir. That's also worth doing because as the water level goes down, the top layer of quinoa won't be covered, so stirring like this helps it cook evenly. Then, when enough of the water has evaporated, such that the quinoa is running the risk of sticking to the bottom of the pan, I turned the heat off, put a lid on, and left it to steam to finish cooking for about 15 minutes. For the pumpkin seeds, I used 70 grams and got my widest frying pan on a high heat and left it to get hot. When it is, then in go the pumpkin seeds and some salt. I find that I can get away with leaving them for a while initially to get some colour, but then they need tossing regularly so that you can see how they're doing. I'm looking for them to be a golden toasted colour. In all the excitement of filming the pumpkin seeds, I did overdo them a bit, so you want yours to be slightly lighter than these. Then they need to come off the heat and be left to cool. I love the popping sound they make when I put them into a tub. Next, onto the raw veg. I was using fresh kale that's on a stem, so it needs tearing off. Using bagged kale is fine too, but if you do use it, then it's worth checking there aren't any big bits of stem left on, as they can be quite tough when eaten raw. I used about 100 grams here. To wash the kale, I covered it with cold water and left it to soak for a couple of minutes, then lifted them out and gave them a little shake. I think washing them like this is better than with a colander, because this way the dirt comes off and sinks to the bottom, whereas if I strained them, then I'd just be pouring the dirt back onto the kale when I did it. And the kale has so much surface area it'd take ages to wash by hand, so this is quicker when using large amounts. Since I'm at the sink, I'll wash the carrot, spring onion and mint. Back to the kale. I seasoned with salt, about half a tablespoon of white wine vinegar, for me that's a cupful, and about a tablespoon of olive oil. Then using my hands I massage the kale, rubbing it between my fingers. This breaks down the kale and will take it from being a tough, firm and chewy texture to being a lot softer and more palatable. Look at how much less volume of kale there is now in the bowl, and look at the difference in texture between the massaged and unmassaged bits. Then the kale can go into a big bowl that I'll assemble the final salad in. The chickpeas should be about ready by now. They should be golden and crispy. I'm not worried if they look dry because they're going into a moist salad, so they'll soften up. I used 2 carrots. To grate them, I only chopped the thin ends off. There's no point cutting the thick end off because I'm going to grate up to this point anyway. Again, this is something you could easily do in a food processor. In the carrot goes to the big bowl. Next, for spring onion. I used 1 bunch. I like slicing mine at an angle to get slightly longer pieces, and I'm thinly slicing these. I don't want to use the very ends of the spring onions, the part where it's only 1 layer thick, because this is the bit that's often full of dirt, and I don't think it tastes as nice. Then the spring onions go into the big bowl. With the mint, I just want to use the leaves because the stem is stringy, so not a good texture for this dish. But if you wanted to, you could chop them really finely and you'd get away with it because they do have some flavour in them. But I didn't, so I took the leaves off the stem. I think the easiest way to do it is to hold the end of the stem and drag my fingers down, but if the stem is too small, then I'll just pick the leaves off individually. Then there's 3 options with how to chop the mint. I could finely chop it, which will give it a consistent mint flavour throughout the salad. I could roughly chop it, which will be quicker and easier, but runs the risk of having the mint be sometimes overpowering and sometimes not noticeable. Or there's what I did, which is to very thinly slice the mint. It's somewhat of a middle ground between these two, and it means I can actually bite into the mint without it being too strong. The other reason I like doing it like this is because I think it's nice to be able to see all the ingredients in the dish and not have them disappear, and I'm happy to put more effort in to make my food look nicer, but that's just me. I honestly really enjoy chopping. So the way I do this is by making a little pile of the leaves and then slicing them together. If the leaves are small, then it's worth folding the pile over to stop them from falling out as you chop. Then the mint can join everything else in the big bowl. The quinoa should be about done by now. To check it, I think it's easiest to eat some, and it should be soft with no hard bits. To stop it from cooking, I spread it onto a tray so it cools down more quickly. If I didn't do this, I'd risk overcooking them and they would be stodgy rather than light and fluffy. In the blender is 100 grams of almonds, and you can see that I started chopping them, as, like I said, I like chopping and find it very therapeutic. And you absolutely can chop them, but I think most people would prefer to just blitz them. I was careful not to do them too fine, as I don't want the almonds to be powdery. As a bit like the mint, I want to know the almond is there so I can bite into it. The nuts provide a lot of the texture to this salad, so I want small pieces I can bite through. Into the bowl they go. Then I added the toasted pumpkin seeds and the chickpeas. When I added the quinoa is when I realised that I should have done this in a big baking tray or a huge saucepan, because I've made a lot of salad here. The beetroot should also be ready now. To check it's cooked, I just stab a knife through the thickest area, and they're cooked if I can slip the knife in and out without any resistance. To cool them down so they stop cooking, I ran the pan under the the cold tab. I need to keep it running for a while instead of just placing them in cold water, because they store enough heat that they would just heat the cold water back up and would continue to cook. When they're cold to the touch, then they're fine to drain. With the beetroot, I'm wearing gloves, and that's something I've taken home from working in restaurants, because in a professional kitchen it's really important that your hands are clean and presentable all day. And the beetroot will stain them and won't come out for a while without spending an age scrubbing them in the sink. And again, I'm using an old chopping board that I don't mind if it gets stained. I didn't remove the skins as they come off as I grate, but they do make the beetroot very slippery, so it's probably a good idea to remove them first. You could use a food processor for this instead. If you're going to, I would remove the skins first, as I think they're quite tough and leathery in texture. So basically, however you do it, don't do what I did, take the skins off. Then the beetroot goes into the bowl. The dates have nicely absorbed the orange juice and are a lot softer now, so in they go. Now I just need to mix and try not to make a massive mess with my bowl that's way too small. I've got my gloves on again as I'm handling the beetroot. I rub the salad a bit like I did with the kale, but more gently, as I want to separate everything in case anything has clumped together. I'm making sure to mix thoroughly by lifting up from the bottom of the bowl. You could do this with a spoon, but I think it's quicker and easier to mix thoroughly, to just get stuck in with your hands. Plus, I think it's fun. I really love how bright this dish is. I've harnessed the beetroot's almighty staining power to give the dish a lot of its colour. A quick taste to check I'm happy with the seasoning, as I might want to add some salt or pepper, but I think this is spot on. At this point, I'm basically done and could just leave it in the bowl for people to serve themselves. The salad will keep in the fridge in an airtight container for 3 days. Given it's a salad, it's difficult to really wow anyone with the presentation, but I'll tell you what I did to make it look as nice as possible. I'd serve it in a bowl because that's more suitable for a salad, and it would look flat on a plate and be harder to eat. Allow an inch or two of space from the edge of the bowl and build upwards to give it some height. It's important to make sure that each time you spoon some salad into the bowl, that you throw a bit onto the worktop. I tend to build a ring around the edge, as then it's easier to place the rest of the salad in the middle without it falling down the edges, which is what tends to happen if I just chuck it on in the middle straight away. I kept a few pumpkin seeds and almonds aside to use as a garnish, but I could have also used some mint, spring onions or chickpeas. Garnishing with these adds some nice contrast. I also happen to have a bit of parsley growing which works nicely, but is by no means necessary.